Welcome to video reaction to An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And I'm going to start by saying, wow. Till you really go through and get the history, it's probably the first time I've really gotten to understand why there's controversy about Columbus Day versus Indigenous Peoples Day, and understanding that it was absolutely a genocide. This book was not an opener for sure. I grew up in this. Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Columbus Day parades. All hail Columbus. And you start to realize that A, it's not just Columbus, but B, all the kind of settlers that came here. I'm going to say, it was absolutely a war. I don't know how it's different from Russia invading Ukraine, honestly, after reading this. Yes, some amends have started to be made, but is it enough? This clip from The Sopranos, I think this encapsulates kind of people. I'm going to include myself in this to a point. I think I knew a little bit more, but you kind of just read some of the headlines and some of the news stories, but without the history, this may be, and definitely 15, 20 years ago when this was filmed, the sentiment of probably a lot of people.
The New Jersey Council of Indian Affairs has announced plans to disrupt Monday's Columbus Day Parade in Newark. Council Chairman Del Redclay, professor of cultural anthropology
Stop blowing your nose. I want to hear
says
this.
council members and supporters will lie down in the path of Columbus Day marches, quote, in protest of Columbus's role in the genocide of America's native peoples, unquote. To launch their protest, the Native Americans and their sympathizers plan to begin a death watch tomorrow over the statue of Columbus in Christopher Columbus Park.
Balls bad-mouthed in America, especially now.
I thought Columbus was the hero of America.
See, it's these Indians. And Columbus is a slave trader instead of an explorer.
You gotta admit, they did get massacred, the Indians.
It's not like we didn't give them a bunch of shit.
I'm going to kind of cut there. I think what you might hear people say is, well, they got a reservation, they got some land. Let's get into why that's not probably. It's not. So, again, Columbus, this is a statue in Philly. It's being covered up. In fact, just this weekend, there was a story about a lawsuit about the Philadelphia trying to remove the Columbus statue. And I think Dunbar Ortiz's book does a good job of trying to educate people to kind of move beyond and accept the fact that the beginning of our country is ugly. So some of the key things that Dunbar Ortiz touched on is manifest destiny being a euphemism to kind of make it sound all great when in reality the settlers came in and just destroyed the indigenous people, causing a genocide, used scorched earth tactics of taking away food, the land. What we did against the Indians, the history of the United States, perfected war and imperialism for the United States that carries through today. The treatment of indigenous people is absolutely brutal and horrible, which we'll get into in a couple minutes. Again, the strides aren't enough. So here's one quote that I think really encapsulates everything. They did not settle a virgin land. They invaded and displaced a resident population. You might think of Indians and teepees and all that kind of stuff. But in reading this, and this is a picture of early 20th century of some indigenous people working on some irrigation for some planting areas, did not realize that they had built a 20-mile canal. According to Dunbar Ortiz, there were 800 miles of irrigation system, canals, and all that kind of stuff. The indigenous people had created the land and opened it up some forest area for hunting, which then came in and destroyed, not realizing that they had perfected how to survive on this land. And the biggest reason is money, money, money. Money. So you get, think this is a great quote. The collusion of business and government and the theft and exploitation of indigenous lands and resources is the core element of colonization and forms the basis of wealth and power, U.S. wealth and power. Absolutely. Coming in, taking out the indigenous people, creating a genocide, trying to take their farmland, take over the fur trading, take over the hunting, take over everything, keep expanding west, keep taking over land, making treaties left and right and not acknowledging them later, going back on their word. It's all about money. Read this quote. They bribed some of the Indian leaders, indigenous people, tribe leaders, and it became a commodity in which we could, or keep the settlers, it became the land, form of capital. I love this quote from Martin Luther King Jr., cited in the book, Our Nation Was Born in Genocide. First time I read it, it's a little strong. There's no doubt about it that it's absolutely true. One of the things Bacon's Rebellion affected the development of genocidal policies aimed at the indigenous people, namely the creation of wealth and colonies based on landholding and land poor settlers, farmers as foot soldiers. We took soldiers, we sent settlers, we sent them in as soldiers to wipe these people out, ethnically cleanse the land. There was a scalp trade, basically. It became, people scalped the Indians, and get in a minute or so the term Redskins, some of the issues with that not recently, but that became a form of capital. Cultural capital. I have a scalp, you could sell it. Think about that. You're scalping people alive to death. This is John Sevier. He gave orders for scorched earth offensive, again, trying to take away the food from the indigenous people, wanted to starve them out. This is a letter he sent to a village. War will cost the United States much money and some lives, but it will destroy the existence of your people as a nation forever. If that's not saying I'm going to take you out, I don't know what does. This absolutely shows the extent that the settlers in the U.S. Army were willing to go, and the soldiers and generals were willing to go to take over the land. This is a picture of Sevier in the statue of him in the U.S. Capitol building. Columbus is getting taken down. I'm not sure why that's still there. I'm not huge on cancel culture, but it's a genocide. You've seen some things, and this really the book made me think back to, this was the old Washington Redskins logo, the old Cleveland Indians. Well, now they're the Washington Commanders and the Cleveland Guardians. They've gotten rid of those team names. And we have here the Texas Rangers baseball team. I got starting to think about this when this quote came up. One of the first acts of pro-slavery independent government was to establish a counterinsurgency force that, as its name, the Texas Rangers suggests, followed the American way of war in destroying indigenous towns, eliminating native nations in Texas, pursuing ethnic cleansing. If that's what the Rangers did, I'm not sure how there is a push to actually get rid of that name for not just this, but the policing powers of the Texas Rangers. Sorry, run short on time. One of the other things that really got to me was the Buffalo Soldiers taking now free, quote unquote, African American former slaves and getting them into the genocidal warfare. It says this is precisely how colonialism in general and colonial warfare in particular work. They were a special organized military group, battled against and beat the indigenous people. Think about that for a minute, though. Had they and the indigenous people, the Indians, joined forces, maybe they win. Maybe this all is different, but this is kind of the way in reading this book, the U.S. government seems to have manipulated people to create these colonies for colonialization and imperialism to move west. And we get the narrative of James Fenimore Cooper. Public relations aspect of Andrew Jackson. I do not lose. Again, he's on the $20 bill. Although Jackson and his fellow Tennesseans made it clear that their goal was the extermination, their rhetoric claimed self-defense. The way they framed what was being done. Said, want to get people to disappear from the face of the earth. There was definitely economic dependency, a good way of using alcohol to get people basically I don't want to say drug dealers, but you're getting people hooked on alcohol and then trying to get them to avoid the discipline. All right, come on over to our side, outlawing certain things like the Sundance. The reservations themselves were not safe havens. And again, I like the way this was phrased, incarcerated. I mean, people were held captive. There were boarding schools to try to, quote unquote, assimilate. And corporal punishment was unknown in indigenous families, but routine in boarding schools. Women were raped and on reservations. Treated absolutely horribly. Indian country, still used today. The Philippines used the scorched earth strategy, perfected during the Indian Wars. During the invaded Afghanistan and after 9/11, Al Qaeda and the Seminoles were compared to each other. Really? Al Qaeda came to the United States. The United States went into the Seminole country. Anyway, let's move on. Kind of run out of time here, so there were some things that have been done through history. I mean, treaties are binding. Are they still being followed? Probably not. $3.4 billion settlement in 2009. I like this one. The Sioux Indians awarded $106 million for Black Hills in 1980. They don't want the money. They want the land back. So now that's sitting there. It's like $757 million in 2010. It's probably $1 billion and change now. They just want the money back. And then it's the last thing I'll end on. Repatriation. Basically, returning the bodies of indigenous people to their nations. And according to the book, there's some science group is still holding 2 million bodies that they're not turning over. And I just saw this weekend too. We're still handing bodies over. So yeah, there's been some stuff, some money given, but for what they've gone through, that's all I can end on. Wow.